The letter had reached him in the Bay of Biscay, 3 weeks out of Lisbon, folded into the dispatch pouch alongside a Portuguese trade agreement and a request from the Admiralty about convoy routes. He had read it once, standing at the stern rail with the Atlantic wind pulling at his coat, and then he had stood very still for a long time while the water moved beneath him and the sails bent overhead, and the men at the capstan went on with their work as if nothing had changed, because for them, nothing had. His wife was dead. That was what the letter said. Margaret Ashworth, Duchess of Carwick, deceased the 14th of October in her 32nd year. The estate solicitor had written it in his small, precise hand. The Dowager Duchess of Carwick, his own mother, had countersigned the bottom with a line so level it might have been ruled. No cause given, no elaboration, just the plain declarative lines of finality, and a note that interment would be delayed pending his return from the continent. And Julian Ashworth, the Duke of Carwick, had sailed for England with grief in his chest and the particular guilt of a man who had not been where he was supposed to be when the thing he was supposed to prevent had happened anyway. He had not been home in 2 years. He had not been home in 2 years because the marriage had been a mistake from the beginning, contracted in haste when he was 22 and Margaret was 20, and the mistake had calcified over 8 years into a polite, careful, excruciating silence. They had been courteous to each other. They had been, by all observable measures, perfectly correct. She had run the house with quiet efficiency and attended the necessary dinners and written the necessary letters and looked at him across every dinner table with those pale, guarded eyes and said the things that were required to be said. And he had said the things that were required to be said, and between the required things, there had been nothing, a long, unbroken nothing that grew heavier with every season. He had gone to sea because the sea was honest, and the great house was not, because the Admiralty had offered him a posting to the Mediterranean trade routes, and he had taken it the way a drowning man takes a line thrown from a distance, without shame, without hesitation, simply grateful that it had come. Now the ship was turning for England, and he was going home to bury her. He stood at the rail as the Dorset coast appeared out of morning gray, the chalk cliffs white above the dark channel water, and he felt the particular cold that had nothing to do with the wind. He had not known what to feel for Margaret while she lived. He did not know what he felt now. There was guilt in it, certainly, because he had not been there, because a man was supposed to be there. And there was something else underneath the guilt, something quieter and more complicated, a private reckoning with the years and the silence and the careful, correct distance of two people who had never actually tried to know each other, and he would not name it while the sailors were watching. The coach from Lyme collected him at the harbor and delivered him to the gates of Carwick before noon. The house was draped in mourning black, the long windows shuttered, the front portico hung with crepe that moved in the sea wind like something unhappy. His mother would have managed all of it. His mother managed everything. She was waiting in the entrance hall when he came through the door, standing before the fire in the great stone hearth, with her hands folded and her black silk perfectly pressed. The Dowager Duchess of Carwick had been 60 in the face since she was 40, and had apparently decided long ago that emotion was a weakness other families permitted. She had been in full mourning at his father's funeral 17 years ago, and had looked, if anything, at ease. "Julian." She offered her cheek. He kissed it. It was cool and papery and smelled of lavender. "You are later than I expected. There was weather in the channel." "There is always weather in the channel." She turned toward the corridor. "Come into the drawing room. There is something we must discuss before you see the house." He stopped in the act of handing his coat to the footman. Something in her voice was different from any of the registers he had learned to read across 3 decades of her company. Not grief. Not relief. Something closer to bracing. The tone of a woman who has been carrying a significant weight and is about to set it down in front of someone who will not entirely thank her for it. Is something wrong? Something, his mother said carefully, is rather complicated. If you have ever wondered what it looks like when a man discovers that the world has rearranged itself completely without his knowledge or consent, stay with this story. The drawing room was cold despite the fire. His mother sat in the high-backed chair she had always preferred, the one that faced the door, and folded her hands in her lap with a precision that he recognized as the outward sign of an inward calculation. "The funeral," she said, "has not yet taken place." "I know." The solicitor's letter explained the delay. "The delay," his mother said, "is somewhat more significant than the solicitor communicated. Julian." A pause. In 35 years of receiving difficult news from his mother, he had learned that a pause of this particular quality meant she was choosing her words very carefully rather than arranging her feelings, because her feelings were secondary to her architecture. "Margaret is not dead." He heard the words. They passed through him in sequence and arrived somewhere central and refused to settle. "I beg your pardon." "She is not dead. She has been living in the East Cottage since October. The cottage at the edge of the home farm, the one your father used for the estate manager before Hendricks built his own house. She has been there since the first week of October." A pause. "She has been there with the children." The children? He heard his own voice from a slight distance. It sounded very level, which was apparently what his voice did under extreme circumstances. "Margaret does not have children. We did not have children." Something in his mother's face shifted, a fractional adjustment of the carefully maintained stillness. Something that in another person he might have called guilt, and in his mother he was not certain what to call. "She does," his mother said. "She did. They are 7 and 5 now. A girl and a boy. She arrived at the East Cottage in September of last year with nothing but a trunk and the 2 children. She told Mrs. Hendricks at the home farm that she was a widowed gentlewoman of modest means, seeking lodgings." His mother's mouth pressed flat for a moment. She did not present herself as the Duchess of Carwick. Julian sat down. He was not certain he had decided to sit down. His body had apparently made the decision without consulting him. The fire moved. Outside the shuttered windows, the sea wind pressed at the glass. "Why?" he said. And the word was not large enough for what he meant by it. "Why is my wife living in the East Cottage and telling your tenant she is a widow?" "She left." His mother said it with a simplicity that he knew was constructed. "She left because she believed you were not coming back. Not from the posting. From the marriage. She had heard, through channels I will not presently dignify by naming, that you intended to pursue a separation upon your return." The pale blue eyes met his steadily and held. She did not wish to wait for the machinery of a formal separation to grind through her. She did not wish to remain the Duchess of Carwick, with all of its conditions, while you remained at sea. She wished, apparently, to be herself. To have something small and real and hers, without the weight of a title that had never quite fit. His mother looked at the fire. "I cannot entirely blame her for the impulse." Julian looked at his mother. "Why did you write me that she was dead?" His mother looked at him for a long moment. "Because she asked me to." He left his mother in the drawing room and walked out through the servants' passage and across the home farm in the November cold. The East Cottage was a quarter-mile across the frost-hard grass, a stone building that had been well kept when Hendricks lived there and was better kept now. The path to the door had been recently swept. A small kitchen garden at the side had been put up properly for the winter. The beds turned and covered. The gate latched with care. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin white line against the gray sky. He walked toward it without thinking clearly about anything, only aware of the cold and the distance and the particular quality of stillness that settles over a landscape that has been kept secret from you. He knocked. The door opened. He had expected something particular when he saw her. He had been formulating it on the walk across the farm without quite meaning to, some version of understanding or recognition or vindicated grief. And what he felt instead was none of those things. It was more like the sensation of a room he had left a long time ago, returned to after years, when the light comes in differently and the furniture has been moved, but the dimensions are unmistakably the same. She was wearing a plain sage green dress with a cream fichu at the throat and had her auburn hair pinned simply with tendrils loose at the temples, and she was holding a dish towel in both hands as if she had been interrupted in the middle of ordinary work, which she had, and she looked at him with those large hazel eyes, and he saw, in the first unguarded second, that she had not expected him to come himself. She had expected a letter, perhaps, or a solicitor. She had not expected him. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said at last, because he did not know what else to call her, and she was still his wife, and the name was the only solid thing in the moment. Something crossed her face that he could not fully read, a small, private adjustment. "You had better come in," she said. The cottage was one main room with a sleeping loft above and a kitchen alcove to one side, and it was small and orderly and smelled of bread and wood smoke, and the particular domestic warmth of a space that has been lived in with care. There were children's drawings pinned to the wall beside the fireplace. A small spinning top sat on the windowsill. 2 tiny pairs of shoes stood neatly by the door, a pair of small leather boots and a pair smaller still. He stood in the middle of the room and felt the full weight of his own situation settle on him. "They are with Mrs. Hendricks this morning," she said. She had set the dish towel on the table and was standing with her back to the kitchen wall, her arms folded loosely at her waist. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had decided, some time ago, exactly what she was willing and not willing to accept, and who had organized her life according to that decision with a thoroughness that had nothing of defiance in it and everything of necessity. "I expected you would come eventually. You told my mother you were dead. I told her I wished to be dead to your household." Her chin did not waver. She interpreted it as she thought best. "She wrote to me in the Bay of Biscay and told me my wife had died." "I know." For the first time, something moved across her face that was not composure, a small and specific distress. "I am sorry for that. I did not intend for the letter to be so stark. I asked her to release you from the obligation. She chose her own method." Julian looked at her across the small, warm room. 8 years of polite silence across dinner tables. 8 years of a marriage conducted with exquisite correctness and total emotional absence. 2 people living in the same great house with nothing between them that could honestly be called a life. He thought of her arriving at this cottage in September with a trunk and 2 small children, whose existence he had not known, and something cold and specific settled in his chest that had nothing to do with the November air. "Whose children are they?" he said. It was not what he had meant to ask first. He had meant to ask other things first. He asked it anyway because it was the center of the room, and he had spent too many years standing around the edges of things. She looked at him for a long, entirely still moment. "They are mine," she said. "And they are yours." The silence was total. He sat down at the kitchen table without being invited, and she sat across from him, and neither of them spoke for a while. The fire burned. Outside in the kitchen garden, a thrush landed and departed again. The distance between them was the width of a small wooden table, and a very long time. "I did not know," he said. "You were in Lisbon when I first wrote, and then in Gibraltar. And then, according to your mother, somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean." She met his gaze without challenge, without bitterness, with the simple level force of fact stated plainly. "I sent 3 letters over the course of 11 months. None were answered. I did not receive 3 letters." Something settled into stillness in her face. "No," she said. "I came to understand that." He thought of his mother. He thought of the pale blue eyes and the folded hands and the particular management of information that his mother had always practiced with the confidence of a person who believed she knew better than the people she managed. He felt a cold fury at the machinery of it that he had no immediate place to direct. He set it aside. "Their names," he said. "Eleanor Jane." A pause. "I named her before I had formed any fixed opinion of your mother. And Thomas Julian." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, she was looking at him across the table with that quiet, attentive steadiness. And he understood something he had not understood across 8 years of living in the same house. That she had always been this woman. The guarded eyes and the careful silence at dinner had not been coldness. They had been the specific caution of a woman who had married a man who was almost immediately, reliably absent, and who had learned to need nothing from him because expecting nothing from him was the only way to survive the fact of him. The guilt in his chest was different now, more specific, more precisely his own. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said, and he shook his head. "The rumor of a separation, whether you heard it correctly or not." He looked at the fire. "I thought about it. When I was first in Lisbon, in the first year, I thought that we had made each other very unhappy for a long time, and that perhaps the kindest thing would be to end it cleanly." He paused. "And then I thought that ending it cleanly was the easy thing, not the kind thing, and that I had been choosing easy things for the better part of my adult life. The sea, the distance, the convenience of being somewhere that was not here." He looked back at her. "I did not send any letter regarding separation. I was not going to do it. I had already requested a return of my posting before your mother's letter reached me. I was coming home." She was very still. "I was coming home to try to be a person worth coming home to," he said. The sound she made was very small. It was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. "You have a considerable amount of ground to make up," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know." He did not see the children that first morning. He thought it was too much too fast for all of them. And he walked back to the great house and spent the afternoon with the solicitor and the estate books. And he thought about those hazel eyes and the kitchen garden put up with such careful practicality, and the way she had looked at him across the small table, with neither hope nor despair, but with a precise honesty that he had not known she possessed, because he had never given her a context in which to exercise it. He went back the following day, and the day after that. The walks across the home farm became part of the shape of his mornings. The cold grass. The particular quality of the sea light off the Chesil bank. The smoke rising from the cottage chimney before he could see the building itself. He brought wood the second time, because the cottage supply was running low and the winter was coming in properly, and she accepted it without comment or ceremony, which he found, in some way he did not immediately examine, enormously preferable to gratitude. He helped Eleanor Jane identify 3 additional good stones from the garden wall on the 3rd morning. He sat with Thomas at the kitchen table and watched him arrange and rearrange a set of small carved wooden animals with the particular concentration of a child for whom the arrangement of things is a serious philosophical project. And he did not rush him, and Thomas appeared to find this satisfactory. He ate bread and cold meat at the kitchen table on the fourth day, because Margaret had not planned for a visitor and made no apology for it. And he ate it with more appetite than he had felt in months. He was learning the shape of her days. The early morning in the kitchen before the children woke, the hour she spent at the small writing desk in the corner with letters and the household accounts. The way she listened when he spoke, not with the careful neutral attention she had brought to their dinner table conversations across 8 years, the attention that heard the surface and maintained a polite distance from the depth, but with the complete and particular attention of a person who had decided the subject was worth following all the way to its conclusion. He was also, slowly and with a degree of difficulty he had not anticipated, learning to be looked at honestly. On the third morning, he met Eleanor Jane. She was in the kitchen garden when he arrived, small and fair and deeply occupied with the question of whether a particular stone was a good stone or merely an adequate one, and she looked up at him with her mother's hazel eyes and performed the instant unsentimental assessment that children perform on strangers, and apparently found him satisfactory because she held the stone out to him. "It is a good one," she said. "You can hold it." He held it. It was smooth and gray and cool, and lay in his palm with the modest solidity of a thing that knew exactly what it was. "Thank you," he said. "Mamma says you are our papa," she said, looking at him with a directness that reminded him, suddenly and very specifically, of his wife across the kitchen table. "I am," he said. She considered this with the thoroughness it apparently deserved. "You have been away a very long time." "I have." "Thomas does not know what a papa looks like," she said. "I told him they look like men." He did not think that was very helpful. Julian crouched down so that he was at her level, the cold ground under his boots, the frost on the garden earth, and met the small, steady hazel gaze directly. "It is not very helpful," he admitted. "I will do better." Eleanor Jane accepted this as sufficient. She retrieved her stone, examined it once more for quality, and put it in her coat pocket. He met Thomas at the cottage door half an hour later, a small, dark-haired boy with his own gray eyes, who regarded him from behind Margaret's skirt with a gravity that was almost comical in its seriousness, and then, without any warning or explanation, stepped forward and raised both arms to be picked up. Julian picked him up. He was not prepared for the specific weight of it, the actual solid warmth of a small child who had decided, in the instant and entirely practical way of children who have not yet learned to distrust their own instincts, that this was a person worth trusting. Thomas curled one hand into his collar and looked out at the kitchen garden from this new elevation with a placid satisfaction, as if the matter were entirely settled. Julian stood in the cold doorway of the east cottage holding his son, and felt something rearrange itself inside him with the quiet finality of furniture moved back to where it had always been meant to stand. Margaret watched from the doorway with her careful hazel eyes and said nothing. She did not need to. There was the matter of his mother. It could not be avoided. She was the Dowager Duchess of Carwick, and she ran the great house with the precision of a general and the territorial authority of a woman who had never been asked to vacate anything in her life, and she had spent 3 months telling anyone who inquired that the Duchess of Carwick had died, and there were neighbors who had called to pay respects, and the vicar at Trescott who had prepared the ground. He had not anticipated it resolving itself in the drawing-room on a Tuesday morning in the company of Lady Petworth from the neighboring estate, but Dorset operated on its own schedule. Lady Petworth had been there when he arrived. She was a small, sharp-featured woman of 50, with opinions about everything within a 12-mile radius. And she had a young woman with her, a Miss Constance Graves, who was the third daughter of the Graves family at Trescott, and who was dressed in the particular manner of a woman who has been told there might be an eligible duke present. His mother had arranged this. He understood it in the moment he walked through the door and saw the careful, anticipatory arrangement of the room, the chairs positioned, the tea laid. His mother's expression, wearing the quality of a hand, played in advance. Lady Petworth turned to him with a warm and slightly predatory smile. "Your Grace, how good to have you back among us. We have all felt the tragedy most deeply." She gestured toward Miss Graves, who curtsied with admirable precision. "You will know the Graves family. Constance has been a great comfort to your dear mother in her sorrow." Julian looked at his mother. His mother looked back with the pale blue eyes and the level expression and the particular stillness of a woman who is committed to a position. He had thought about this carefully. Walking back from the East Cottage 2 evenings ago in the dark, the sea wind in his face, he had thought about what Margaret deserved. What the children deserved. What kind of man he intended to be, now that being that man had become unavoidably urgent. "Lady Petworth," he said. "Miss Graves." He was aware of the solicitor's letter sitting on the side table, where his mother had placed it as part of the room's arrangement. "I am afraid there has been a significant error in the communications surrounding my return." His mother's hands folded in her lap. "There has been no death at Carwick," he said, in the level register he had learned to use at sea when a situation required clarity above all else. "The Duchess of Carwick is in residence on the estate. She has been here since October. She is in excellent health." Lady Petworth's face performed several adjustments in rapid succession. "There was a misunderstanding in the correspondence," he continued. "The Duchess withdrew from the main house for reasons of her own privacy and health, and that withdrawal was, perhaps, communicated in terms more final than she had intended. She is alive. She is my wife. She will be returning to the main house within the fortnight." The silence in the drawing room had the specific quality of a silence produced when something irrevocable has been said in front of a witness. Miss Graves looked at her gloves. Lady Petworth looked at the Dowager. The Dowager's face was composed and entirely still, wearing the expression of a woman who has been corrected by someone with the authority to do so, and has made the calculation that grace is more useful than defiance. "How wonderful," said Lady Petworth, at last, with the particular brightness of a woman rearranging everything she had planned to say for the remainder of the visit. "We shall all be so very glad." That evening he sat with his mother in the drawing room, and they looked at each other across the fireplace with the full, uncomfortable weight of the situation between them. "You overstepped," he said. "I did," his mother said. The words were level. "You kept her letters from me." The fire moved. The silence lasted long enough to be honest. "I thought you would not come back," she said, and her voice changed in a way he had not heard it change very often, something underneath the construction giving way fractionally. "To the house, to the marriage, to any of it. You had been gone so long, and you had been so far away, and she was here. And she was young, and she needed something I did not know how to give her. And I thought that if the matter were resolved, if you believed it was over, you might accept it, and stay gone, and she could have some kind of life, without spending more years waiting for a man who had not come back the first time." She looked at him steadily. "I thought I was being practical. I have been accused of that before. You decided for all of us what our lives were going to be. I did. A pause. I was wrong. He stood. He had the children tomorrow. He had arranged to take Eleanor Jane and Thomas to the beach at Charmouth, which Eleanor Jane had declared essential, and Thomas had approved with his characteristic wordless gravity. "She is going to require a genuine apology from you," he said. "Not managed. Not calculated. She will know the difference." His mother nodded once. "I know," she said. He believed her. He went back to the East Cottage that evening. Margaret was sitting at the table with a candle and a piece of mending when he knocked, and she let him in without ceremony, and they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table and talked for 3 hours, while the fire burned down to coals, not around things, but directly at them. Two people who had spent 8 years practicing the art of saying nothing essential, and were now, perhaps too late, attempting the alternative. He told her about the Bay of Biscay, and the letter, and the particular quality of grieving something that had not been simple enough to grieve cleanly, the way guilt and relief had moved together in him like two tides running in opposite directions. She listened without interrupting. She told him about the 3 letters and the September morning when she had walked out of the great house with the children and a trunk, and the specific cold freedom of deciding that what she had been handed was not the only life available to her. She told him about the cottage in the first weeks, the practical terror of it, the strange elation of making every small decision herself, the kitchen garden she had planted in October, because a woman who has a kitchen garden has a reason to be in a particular place, and reasons were what she had needed most. She told him about Mrs. Hendricks at the home farm, who had been kind without asking questions, and about the first morning Eleanor Jane had said the word "Mama" with the particular confidence of a child who has finally stopped holding her breath. She told him that it had been the loneliest winter of her life, and she told him that she had not been sorry. Both of these things were true, and she said them without contradiction, because she was a woman who had learned, in the past year, to hold complicated things without having to resolve them into simplicity. He listened without interrupting. "I was afraid of you," she said at one point, not as confession but as plain information. "Not of you as a person, of what you represented. You were always so contained, so entirely sealed inside yourself. I thought if I let you see me properly, you would find the contents unsatisfactory, and I would have to watch you become more absent than you already were. I was afraid of the same thing," he said, "of being seen and found insufficient." She looked at him across the small table. "We have been remarkably, mutually obtuse." "We have," he said. "I'm sorry for my part in it. I'm sorry for mine." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, where it rested on the mending. She let him. Her hand was small and warm, and he could feel the small callus at the base of her thumb where the needle had worn the skin, and he kept his hand there in the warmth of it, while the fire burned lower. She did not pull away. She returned to the main house on a Thursday morning in late November, with Eleanor Jane holding her left hand and Thomas riding Julian's shoulders, because he had established this as an acceptable and, in his view, necessary mode of transport. The morning crepe was gone from the portico. The windows had been opened. The entrance hall looked, he thought, like a room that had been reminded it was a home. His mother met them there. The apology was brief, which suited his mother's nature, and was, he thought, not a defect of it. She was not a woman built for long apologies. She met Margaret directly and said without preamble that she had acted from fear rather than wisdom, that she had caused harm she could not undo, and that she was sorry. She said the words and let them stand without ornamentation. Margaret looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said, which was not forgiveness but was not a closed door. and his mother received it as what it was. Eleanor Jane tugged at the dowager's sleeve. "Are you our grandmamma?" His mother looked down at the small, serious face with the hazel eyes. Something moved across her features that he had not seen there in 35 years of watching her face for information. "I am," she said. Eleanor Jane considered this with her customary thoroughness, and then nodded, apparently satisfied. Thomas, from his elevation on Julian's shoulders, looked down at his grandmother with the gray eyes they shared, and then looked out at the entrance hall. With the calm of a person who has assessed a situation and found it acceptable. They ate dinner in the great dining room that evening for the first time in what felt like a previous life. The children were excused after the first course and went with Mrs. Hendricks, recently engaged as nursemaid, and the 3 remaining adults sat with the candles and the wine and the particular cautious honesty of people who have agreed, without saying so, to try. After dinner, he walked with Margaret to the library. It had always been his favorite room in the house, and she had apparently discovered it as her own refuge during the autumn months before her departure, because her books were among his, the spines familiar. A chair pulled close to the fire that had the quality of a chair recently and regularly occupied by someone who had made of it a small, private territory. He stood in the middle of the room looking at her standing among the books she had been reading alone for months, the candlelight warm on her face and the fire at her back, and he felt the full accumulated weight of all the time that had been lost, and under it, steady and specific, something else. "We are going to have to learn each other from the beginning," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know. I am not the woman you married, or rather." She paused, looking for the precise words the way she looked for things in a room, systematically, without waste. "I am not the woman you thought you married. I was always this woman. We simply never met properly." He crossed the room. He had been wanting to cross the room for days, perhaps for years before that without knowing it, and he had been waiting until he had earned the right to cross it, until he had done enough of the patient and unglamorous work of being genuinely present to have any standing from which to move. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly to meet his eyes. "I am going to stay," he said. She looked at him. The firelight was warm on the planes of her face, and her eyes held that particular steady attention. Not guarded now. Something more open. Something that had decided to allow the looking. "I know," she said. He lifted her hand from her side and held it. Only that, his thumb against the small callus at the base of hers, and she did not pull away. "Good," she said. And then, quietly, with the level frankness that was, he was beginning to understand, simply her nature. "I am glad you came home." Outside the library windows the sea was invisible in the dark, but he could hear it, the low steady pull and release of the tide against the Dorset cliffs, a sound that had meant nothing to him as a boy and had meant solitude and distance for the past 2 years and meant something different now, something to do with arriving, with the particular stillness of a ship settling into harbor after a long passage, the motion finally resolved, the water quiet, the ropes made fast. The fire crackled. In the nursery above them, Eleanor Jane would be choosing between the good stone and a merely adequate one, and Thomas would have achieved sleep with his customary efficient gravity, and the great house was breathing around them all in the winter dark. Margaret did not move her hand. Neither did he. By Christmas, the morning crepe was a memory, and the Trescott vicar had received a thorough and carefully worded account of the misunderstanding, which he had accepted with the practiced equanimity of a man who had officiated at too many genuine funerals to be much surprised by the variety of things that were not them. The solicitor had updated the relevant documents. Lady Petworth had recalibrated her opinion 3 times across as many weeks, landing finally on the position that it was all extremely romantic, which was not precisely what had occurred, but was close enough to the truth to be allowed to stand. Eleanor Jane had appointed herself the official keeper of the good stone, which she carried in her coat pocket and produced at intervals for inspection and verification. Thomas had extended his opinion that Julian's shoulders were a satisfactory mode of transport to include Julian's back, his arm, and the step of the library chair, so that Julian had begun to feel, in the private comfort of it, like a piece of furniture that had been thoroughly and enthusiastically claimed. He did not mind. On a cold morning in late December, he stood at the library window with Margaret beside him and watched the children in the garden below. Eleanor Jane instructing Thomas about something with her characteristic seriousness, the frost on the grass catching the low winter sun, the gray sea behind the cliffs. He had not known, sailing into Lyme Harbor in November with grief in his chest and a letter folded in his coat pocket, that the thing he was coming home to bury was not his wife, his. It was the man he had been before he understood what coming home actually meant. Margaret leaned slightly into his arm, not quite touching, the warmth of her shoulder a half-inch from his. He did not move. He stood and let the children's voices come through the glass and the fire at their backs and the stone manor solid around them in the gray December morning, and he thought that this, quiet and specific and ordinary, was what a life felt like when you had finally stopped sailing away from it. Below them, Eleanor Jane held the good stone up to the winter light, turned it once in her small hands to verify it remained satisfactory, and put it back in her pocket. Thomas watched his sister with an expression of serious, collegial approval, and then took her hand as they turned together back toward the house. The stone would be in her pocket that evening, and the morning after, and all the mornings that followed. It was a good stone. It had been there all along, waiting to be held by the right hands. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story found you at the right moment, leave a word in the comments. There will be another one waiting.